Well, when it comes to judgment, we are so good at it, so good at judging ourselves, so good at judging others that we actually don't leave much for God to do. So if we want to look at God as a judge, he's almost unemployed because we do all his work for him. So often we've got our heads into this mindset where we want to look at God as a judge, probably because it's a psychological projection onto the divine. We say that God created us in God's own image and then we return the favour. And so we are so judgmental in ourselves, of ourselves as much, probably more. I've found over the years, spending time with people in spiritual direction, that we are much harsher on ourselves than perhaps God might ever be. We judge ourselves more deeply. And so when we hear Gospels like from St Luke tonight, where we have John the Baptist, who is the towering figure of Advent, we have John sort of with that really prophetic voice. He's sort of in that really old Hebrew prophet mode, comes into town using very strong graphic language, calling the people to repentance. When we hear those words, we are tempted to fall into that mode of seeing God as quite judgmental. But if we read deeply into Luke, that's at least certainly not the way Luke sees it. Matthew might be a little bit different, but Luke doesn't see God as the judge at all. St Luke sees the world, really, and the pain of the world as its own judge. St Luke sees that the consequences of human sin as something that the world delivers all on its own. God doesn't need to be the judge in Luke at all. And I think if we reflect on our own lives, we'll see the truth of what Luke is trying to get across in his narrative. And also, Luke highlights, or at least he has John the Baptist highlight, that those who wish to perpetuate the pain that the world delivers to us are a brood of vipers. John comes in and the religious leaders particularly come to him, and he doesn't let them get away with it. He says, "You brood of vipers." It's not good PR. If he's trying to get people on side, he's not doing a very good job. "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath that is to come?" The minute we hear that phrase, we'll project that onto God, that the wrath that is to come is a divine wrath. But Luke doesn't let us get away with that. The wrath that is to come is the wrath that is delivered in the context of a society that is unjust, a society that is crumbling around its foundations. Now, John, of course, puts graphic Hebrew prophet kind of language around that, and that's kind of not only hard for us to hear, but it's hard for us to process and to understand without projecting all that stuff onto the divine. So, but the crowd then starts to ask, how can we avoid this wrath of a sin-filled world? And John's answer is really quite simple. Change the world. Change the way you behave within the world. So he goes through a little list for them. And he says to people who have two coats, well, if you want to avoid a a world that delivers pain, delivers the consequence of our corporate or our communal sinfulness. If you want to avoid that, then if you have two coats, give one of them to someone who hasn't got a coat. That's how you avoid that. You start to change the world. And you start to make the world less wrathful. You start to make the world less punishing by behaving in a way that is filled with grace. And likewise, if you've got more food than you need, give it to someone who has less food. And yet you could almost feel, if you slow down in reading John's response, you can almost feel the world becoming a less wrathful place, can't you? You can almost feel the world starting to become a kinder, more gentle, more loving, more gracious, more merciful, more compassionate place to live. So if you've got too much or more than you need, then give it to someone who doesn't have enough. That I often quote the ethicist who I can't never remember his name, but he says, everything that we have that is surplus to our need is stolen from the poor. And Luke loves this idea of levelling the playing field, creating an equitable society. So even the tax collectors come to be baptised by John, and they ask him, how do we avoid this, the wrathful consequences of our actions in the world? And he says, collect no more than is prescribed to you. In other words, don't rip people off. Don't be profiteering in what you're doing. Yes, we need taxes to pay for things, but don't profit from it beyond what a reasonable income would be for that work. And there are soldiers who come to... Now, these are possibly not Roman soldiers, but these are possibly Jewish soldiers who have thrown their lot in with the Roman army, sold their services, could be seen as mercenaries in that sense, and they have power. They have power over the people. And what they do, of course, is they'll accuse people of various things that are against the law and take payment for it to not report it. And so the people then they avert the consequences of that accusation. And so John's response to them is, do not extort money from anyone. Do your jobs, but do not extort money. So you can see that John's speaking into a society that is inequitable. In other words, people have two coats, some people have none, some people have food, other people have no food. But it's not only inequitable, it is also unjust. There's a clear unjust structure there where people can be accused of things they haven't done and have to pay money, bribe officials to, and that's a society that is entirely unjust and is crumbling at its foundations. So how do we avoid the world punishing us for how we behave within it? Change the way we behave. It's as simple as that, it's a simple recipe. The world will be much kinder to you if you are kind within the world. And so then we are told that people are filled with expectation, and everybody is questioning in their hearts, is this the Messiah? Is this the one who is to come? Or are we to wait for another? Now, behaving in a world that responds to harshness harshly, or that responds to kindness kindly, is only half the story. Those of us who kind of tend towards secular, get that word right, secular humanism a little bit, say, well, it's just about a just society. If we get society right, we get everything right. But Luke says that's only half the story. Yes, we've got to get society right. That's really important, but that's only half the story. Because Luke goes on then to look at a more mysterious dynamic in this equation. Yes, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Yes, vital, so important. But then John goes on to say, there's more. There is one coming after me who is greater, who has more. I'm not worthy even to untie the thong of this one's sandal. This one has so much more to offer than the message I have. This one, I baptise you with water, but this one will baptise you. The text in English says with the Holy Spirit. It says in Greek there's no definite article. It's with a Spirit of holiness. So it's not just about doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly. It is that. But there is also a spiritual dimension to how we avoid the world punishing us. There's something deeper. This one will baptise you with a spirit that is holy and with fire. And with fire. His winnowing fork, we are told, will be in his hand. And he will gather the grain into the granary, and the chaff, what's left over, the waste, will be burnt with unquenchable fire. Interesting, the Greek word for unquenchable fire is per asbestos. That's where we get our word asbestos from. It can't burn. That's why we call it that. It's a fire that it doesn't consume. It goes on and on and on. Now, interestingly, we translate a word there as winnowing fork, and again, the winnowing fork creates the image of sorting the wheat from the chaff. You get a fork and you throw it up in the air, and the chaff's supposed to blow away and the heavier grain falls. But it's a bad translation, because it isn't the winnowing fork at all. This word is never understood as that. It's the winnowing shovel, or the winnowing basket. And it's the shovel that is used to gather the wheat up and to put it in baskets or whatever and store it in the grain. So the imagery that John is using isn't like Matthew uses the sorting out imagery, sorts the sheep from the goats and all that. So, the Son of Man is in Matthew is the one who does this sorting out, but not in Luke. It's the world that does the winnowing fork stuff. It's the world that does the sorting out. It's the one who is to come, the Messiah, who does the gathering. It's the winnowing shovel. It's the one who picks up the wheat and puts it in the baskets. And it's an image of the one who is to come, gathering the people into the kingdom. So in Luke, Jesus isn't the judge, the jury, or the executioner. In Luke, the world looks after that all by itself. But Jesus is the one who comes and gathers the people into the kingdom. So Luke goes on then to say, John exhorted them in many other ways concerning the good news. So what's this particular good news that Luke is having John try and communicate to us? Well, there's a sense in which the good news is that we escape the wrath of the world by doing justice, loving kindness, walking humbly. But there's a weird spiritual dynamic that goes on, that when we behave, that we not only escape the wrath of the world, but we change the world so that the world isn't wrathful either. And in changing the world, we let the chaff blow away, and the wheat's there, ready to be gathered into the kingdom. That's the imagery that Luke is trying to get across, and it's an imagery that we've really kind of missed because we project the wrathful stuff onto God all the time. And it's a beautiful message. It is a good news message. It's that we change the world by living in it a different way. That's the message that Luke is trying to get across. And it blows away with all the chaff that idea of a wrathful God who needs a sacrifice to assuage the wrath. It's that sort of penal substitutionary theory of what Jesus did. You know, God wanted to kill us, but he killed Jesus instead. Luke blows that away. Joseph Ratzinger, before he became Pope Benedict, addressed this by saying that Jesus' sacrifice was not a human sacrifice to an angry God, which is the penal substitutionary theory of the atonement stuff. Wasn't a human sacrifice to an angry God, but a divine sacrifice to an angry world. A divine sacrifice to an angry world. And that's the good news. That's what we are called to be part of. To assuage the anger of the world by living in it, in justice and love and compassion and mercy. And that is a sacrifice. For anyone who's ever tried it, it is a sacrifice, and it is costly. But it does have an effect. It does change the world. And that is good news. The Lord be with you.